Yeah, I hate these. It's pure memorization. There's no. So this is what's called Part 97 definitions as part of the FCC rules and regulations.
Mhm.
And it'll talk about interference, about repeater frequency coordinators, and the International Telecommunications Union. So there's rules and regulations involved with all of those. So the FCC is chartered with regulating and enforcing, among other things, the amateur radio service. And they define the basis and purpose of the amateur radio service as advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art. Sounds impressive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You need to remember that one, though.
Mm-hmm.
Which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service in the U.S.?
Charlie.
Yep.
Charlie.
Which of the following is part of the basis and purpose of the amateur radio service?
Charlie.
Yep.
Okay, some of the definitions. They define a beacon, which we talked about, is an amateur station transmitting communications for the purposes of observing propagation or related experimental activities. Now, we only talked about beacons on satellites, but there's Earth station beacons all over the world. And they are primarily used to determine propagation. So they send out signals, in some cases on different frequencies. And if you can receive that beacon, it's telling you that the propagation between where you are and where that beacon is pretty good. Like I said, there's hundreds of them all around the world. And they're down as low as the low frequency band, which is down below like broadcast radio, all the way up into the microwaves. But it's basically a test. You can use it to calibrate antennas, or you can use it to determine what the propagation is. If you're not hearing any beacons anywhere, you might as well go back to bed. The satellite beacons are sometimes used for some ionospheric research, kind of the same way. I mean, you can tell by how strong the satellite beacon signal is as to what the propagation is through the ionosphere. They define a space station as an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. So most space stations is the amateur transmitter receiver as opposed to the satellite itself. So the space station is located on a satellite. They either have transponders or repeaters. I think most of them probably have transponders, which work slightly different than repeaters. And they're under automatic control. In other words, in a small amateur satellite, there's no control operator physically there. So they're operated either automatically or possibly remote. I guess they can communicate with ground stations, and one of the modes where they do that is called store and forward. Whereas the satellite's coming over, you can send a message that's stored on the satellite, the space station, until it gets over where the receiving station is, and they can then receive that message, which is why it's called store and forward. So what is the FCC Part 97 definition of a beacon?
Delta.
Delta.
What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a space station?
Charlie.
Charlie.
That was quick.
Yeah. I got the 50, that's why. Numbers, focus in on that number.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of these things.
Mhm.
So harmful interference is defined as interference which endangers the functioning of radio navigation service or other
Mhm.
safety services, or seriously degrades, obstructs, or repeatedly interrupts a radio communication service operating in accordance with the radio regulations. If you're interfering with a commercial broadcast service, you can get a very healthy fine and go to jail. They take that seriously. If you're interfering with an amateur radio transmission, they don't have the people to do anything about it. So that's pretty much something that has to be handled by the people themselves. But one of the things is that amateur stations are never supposed to willfully interfere with other amateur stations. If you're doing it accidentally, that's okay, and you're supposed to negotiate, who changes frequency.
Uh-huh.
So when is willful interference to other amateur stations permitted?
Willful.
Bravo.
Yeah, no, bravo.
Bravo. Never. Except
Emergency. Yeah, life.
Right.
Yeah.
So the FCC is also responsible for assigning the responsibility of repeater frequencies to a volunteer group called the Volunteer Regional Frequency Coordinator. So for each area, there's one of these groups, and they're responsible for approving repeater frequencies. So if you're some club or an individual and you want to set up a repeater, you have to get approval from the frequency coordinators for a frequency you want to use. Otherwise, it would just be a mess. So they try to allocate frequencies so that no other repeater within a distance where it might interfere has the same frequency. Sometimes due to propagation, that happens. Sometimes the repeater up in Jacksonville will actually interfere with the one here at the Space Center on top of the VAB, because they're on the same frequency, which is why they implement the continuous tone coded squelch system in order to block that. But it's the volunteer organization that does the frequency coordination for repeaters. And there should be one for each geographical area. I don't know how big they are. So which of the following entities recommends transmit receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations?
Bravo.
As I understand it, there's only like 3 FCC regional field offices in the country. So that's one of the reasons why the FCC pretty much delegates all of their stuff to other organizations or volunteer groups. Who selects a frequency coordinator?
Delta.
Delta.
I probably didn't go over that one enough.
Uh-huh.
Who selects a frequency coordinator?
The FCC delegates the responsibility, but the local
Actually
amateur
selects them. Okay.
decide who's going to do that. I don't know all the specifics. I guess they vote. It's kind of like an election for the group of people. Operating outside the amateur bands is considered a serious offense. And the FCC really doesn't like that. And if you're interfering with, like I said, a broadcast or emergency service, that's something that they actually get involved in. And there's been cases of people going to jail and being fined like $50,000.
Wow.
As a technician license, you have some limited audio privileges on HF or 10 meters. You can operate CW or Morse code on the 80, 40, and 15 bands, limited to 200 watts peak envelope power. We'll talk more about that one. It's just a way they measure the power that you're outputting. And you can do data and phone on a segment of the 10-meter band, also limited to 200 watts. If you were a general or an extra, you'd be limited to 1,500 watts. You can do 1,500 watts if you're at VHF or above. Except for the 1.25 meter band, which I think that's around 200 megahertz. You're limited to 50 watts. This chart is showing the different bands and where you can operate, the high and low, and the modes. The red ones are the important ones to remember, because as you might guess, there's a question about that one. This is some of the higher bands. Again, the red ones are important. And the UHF, where you can do all modes. You've got the entire band and you've got full power. It's kind of hard to find something that can generate 1,500 watts at those frequencies, but you can do it if you can afford it.
Gotcha.
Which frequency is in the 6-meter amateur band?
I don't have these memorized. I'm going to be useless on this one,
Yeah.
this group.
Well, remember, how do you determine the frequency? It's the speed of light divided by the frequency or by the wavelength, right? In this case, we know the wavelength, you know the speed of light. So 300 divided by 6.
Bravo?
It's one of those two.
Well, Kathy, why don't you suggest alpha and we'll get on with it?
Now I'm getting 186,000 miles per second. I always forget what the rest of it. I know the seconds, but I don't know the other part yet.
What amateur band includes 146.52 megahertz? How many times does 146 go into 300?
Delta.
Delta.
I don't feel steady here.
Nope, me either.
On which HF bands does a technician class operator have phone privileges?
Charlie.
Oh, I'll go for alpha. I have no idea.
Remember, it says phone privileges, audio, single sideband.
I say Charlie.
Now you can do CW and data on those.
Bravo.
I just looked it up in my book and it says 28.3.
Bravo.
All right.
You have limited privileges on HF.
Which of the following frequency ranges are available for phone operation by technician class licensees? This is that little subband. If you just looked it up, you know the answer.
I did look it up. Which of the following frequency ranges are available for phone operation? Charlie. 28.3 to 28.5.
That's the only one you have to remember. Where may single sideband phone be used in amateur bands above 50 megahertz? 50 megahertz is 6 meters.
I'm looking it up in the book. Okay, just to say, it's Charlie.
Right. The last one there, I don't know of any band where you're limited to 25 watts. And you're certainly, most repeaters don't do single sideband, they're FM. And of course, you're not allowed to operate in the or you're not restricted to the general subbands. That one doesn't really make sense. Which of the following VHF, UHF band segments are limited to CW only?
So Kathy, because I'm looking up in the book. So Kathy, if you want to actually answer it.
My mind is right now. I'm just looking at all these numbers going, heck if I know. Just like it's just, they're all a jumble.
So out of the book, I'd say alpha.
Actually, I don't remember, but I would guess alpha. How many amateurs use the 219 to 220 megahertz segment of the 1.25 meter band? Excuse me, not how many, how may.
What? Oh, how may amateurs?
Give me the go-ahead to tell you what's in the book, or do you just want to talk? I mean, that's sort of pointless, right? So you can just tell us the answer.
Yeah, there should have been a line on one of those earlier charts for this one. I don't think I mentioned it. You'll remember it after we do the answer. It's a kind of a special thing in that segment where you're only allowed to do digital messages for forwarding, like for what we talked about, store and forward on a satellite. Why should you not set your transmit frequency to be exactly at the edge of an amateur band or subband? I think I missed a chart back there, but you should be able to figure this one out. Just common sense.
I would guess Bravo. Or maybe Delta.
Good guess.
Oh, yay! I didn't look that one up. You could tell.
Remember, they don't want you operating outside of the band. So if you're close to the band edge, you can't be sure that the frequency on your displayed on your radio is accurate. And then, you have to also allow for the width of the sideband. So if you're doing single sideband and you were doing lower sideband, that means that whatever frequency you're at, you're going to be there and down to 3 kilohertz below that. So you need to be at least 3 kilohertz above the bottom end, or doing upper sideband, 3 kilohertz below the high end. And also, you can have drift in your transmit frequency. It shouldn't be very much, but if you're right on the edge, I mean, it could be enough to cause you to drift off. Okay, so we learned that the FCC regulates and enforces the amateur radio service. What the basis and purpose was, remember that fancy advancing the skills for the radio art. Beacons are primarily used on the ground anyway for observing propagation. A space station is defined as basically a amateur radio that's more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Willful interference is never permitted. The volunteer regional frequency coordinators are delegated by the FCC to essentially manage the transmit receive frequencies. They're sort of elected or chosen by local amateurs. There's the charts again. If you remember, the 10-meter single sideband phone was one of the questions. The 50 to 50.1 for CW was part of a question. The 219 to 220 for the fixed digital messages, that's kind of unique, was one of the questions. Why you should avoid being close to the band edge. Most of the modern radios, when you tune to the band edge, if you actually tune below it, it will maybe in some cases not let you, but usually it'll just give you a beep or something and change the color of the frequency to like red, showing that you're out of band. You can still listen and receive out of band, but you can't transmit.